Olá, daqui a Margarida do Fumaça. Por esta altura, no passado mês de maio, eu e a Maria Almeida estávamos na Bélgica para uma conferência europeia de jornalismo, o Data Harvest. Ficamos na cidade de Mechelen, a pouco mais de 20 km, meia hora de comboio, de uma das principais ruas Red Light de Bruxelas. Aí, na Rue des Corps, a portas meias com as montras, fica a sede do Sindicato das Trabalhadoras e Trabalhadores do Sexo Organizado pela Independência. A 19 de maio fui lá entrevistar o presidente do sindicato, Daan Bauwens, num momento singular na Bélgica. O governo federal tem em curso aquilo a que chama descriminalização do trabalho sexual passo a passo. À data desta gravação, faltavam 13 dias para a entrada em vigor de uma das primeiras leis nesse sentido, a descriminalização da atividade de terceiros que facilitam o trabalho sexual. Está já em vigor desde 1 de junho. Já agora, esta não será a última vez que vamos falar de trabalho sexual no Fumaça. Já gravamos algumas entrevistas com trabalhadoras do sexo para podermos trazer um episódio com testemunhos na primeira pessoa. Procuramos também vozes discordantes daquelas que temos publicado. Se quiseres acompanhar o andamento do nosso jornalismo lento, temos agora uma secção na nossa newsletter semanal para te manter a par do trabalho em curso. Se ainda não a recebes, podes subscrever em fumaca.pt/newsletter. Agora sim, fica com a entrevista. Olá, seja toda a gente bem-vinda ao Fumaça, eu sou a Margarida David Cardoso. Estamos a gravar em Bruxelas, na sede do Sindicato dos Trabalhadores do Sexo Organizadas pela Independência, e comigo está o diretor, Daan Bauwens. Esta entrevista será a partir de agora em inglês. Dan is a Belgian writer, investigative journalist and documentary maker. He worked in Milan, Tel Aviv, Casablanca, Tokyo, Kyoto and New York, and is also, and that's the reason we are here, the director of the Union for Sex Workers Organised for Independence, founded in 2015. The union is a self-organized collective of sex workers which have been campaigning and lobbying for legislative changes. Last March, Belgium federal parliament approved the end of the laws which criminalize sex work. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming.
I'm just going to quote you something that I think you'll remember. We demand respect and recognition as prostitutes, citizens and women. We demand the effective freedom to buy and sell sexual services between consenting adults. We demand respect for our working environment, our physical and moral integrity, and our limits. A past that does not respect our limits and practices is rape. We demand respect for our choices in their diversity. We demand we remain the only judges of our lives' projects. We demand that our clients and those who want to become our clients take note of our decisions, and if necessary, our refusal. No means always no. This is a quote from Putin the Manifest, a long-standing manifesto by French and Belgian associations of sex workers' rights. For you, what is sex work?
Sex is any sexual act which is remunerated. So one person offers a sexual act and the other person pays for the sexual act. Doesn't mean that there has to be even physical contact, webcamming, stripping, where there's normally no physical contact between the provider and the client or the buyer, is in our eyes also sex work.
Yeah. And this is another question from a quote from Vanessa Spingora's memoir, Le Consentiment. And she asks, how is it possible to acknowledge having been abused when it's impossible to deny having consented, having felt desire for the very adult who was so eager to take advantage of you? How do you define sexual consent? We are here in the definitions.
I think it's quite straightforward. I think in the case of sex work, this is very important. We're talking about consensual sex work. In our eyes, in my eyes, in the eyes of my organization, every non-consensual sexual act is rape. We're very clear on that. Consent is given by a contract, an oral contract. So you, as a person who offers a sexual service, you go through the conditions. These are the limits. Within these limits, it is consensual, and this has to be respected.
Yeah, an initial negotiation.
I don't think it even has to be a negotiation, because we don't think that the client should have a lot to say about what the sex. I mean, the client shouldn't be in any way able to push the sex worker to do more than she actually wanted in the beginning. But that's consent. That's consensual sex.
And do you think money is an instrument of coercion?
Well, money is yeah, but it is for everyone. I mean, it is for you, it is for me, it is for the people working for the city government of Brussels, cleaning the streets. It's for anyone who wants to stay alive in this world. It, of course, is an instrument of coercion to stay alive. I mean, we can't escape capitalism. We can't escape the fact that we need money to buy stuff. So I know that this argument is often used by people, by anti-prostitution activists, who say like, okay, you can't consent when money comes into the equation. But then, I mean, everybody is enslaved. You know, everybody is coerced. I mean, we sign a contract. We think it's out of our own free will. Now, if you're a radical Marxist, well, maybe not. But why is this argument only used when it comes to sex work? That is the question.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that because socially and culturally we see sex as something intimate, private, that by law doesn't, we can do it in public? But for instance, working in a factory or an office has nothing intimate or private about it. Do you think there can be considered equivalent?
Equivalent what?
In types of work?
No. I don't think, well, of course, one of our slogans and one of the slogans of the international sex workers' rights movement is sex work is work. Well, yes, because it's remunerated activity. At the same time, sex work is not a job as any other. It entails some specific risks. Yes, it is intimate. It is something that is going on between two people without any, oversight. Mostly two people, in the more like the most common situation, are somewhere alone in a room, and anything can happen in that room. So there are risks. For sure there are risks. It's also, if you talk about intimacy, well, it also entails a sexual act in most of the cases. So we have to start talking about maybe a protection against STDs there. Mm-hmm. So yes, there is a whole set of very important risks that come with the job that you have to take into account if you want to give it a place in your society.
Mm-hmm. And another abolitionist argument that is many times used is that paid sex cannot be wanted sex. So paid sex is unwanted sex. Do you agree?
Well, paid sex is unwanted sex. Depends. I mean, okay. Let's look at it from the like. Let's look at it. As we look, I mean, just let's take the example of other activities. My job as a director or my job as a journalist before. I was paid to be a journalist. Did I not want to be a journalist because I was paid to be a journalist? Well, no, of course not. There were days when I hated my job, but there were days when I absolutely loved it. And then mostly it was somewhere in between. And this is also what we're getting from all the sex workers. There are days when you hate it, there's days when you love it, and mostly it's somewhere in between. But you have to do it to survive. Just like I used to be a journalist to be able to survive until I couldn't anymore. So that's when I changed jobs to become to do what I do right now. But if I can come back to the last question for a second. It is not a job as any other. It entails some specific risks. And then I ended the sentence with, you have to take into account if you want to give it a place in your society. This is the heart of our plea for decriminalization. Sex work exists. In countries where people have tried to outlaw sex work, the risks have gotten bigger. The infections have gotten have multiplied. The violence against sex workers has increased. We see that. We have those data. Those are peer-reviewed studies. At the same time, we are being attacked for wanting to deregulate sex work by wanting to decriminalize it. But no, decriminalizing sex work means you start looking at it as a job as any other, while we know it is not a job as any other, but we see it as a job as any other because any other job has regulation which protects the people doing the job against the job-specific risks. And that is what we are trying to make possible. And that is why I said, if you want to take it, if you want to give it a place in your society, which you should, because it's there and it's not going to disappear because you outlaw it. If you want to give it a place inside of your society, well, then we just make a legal framework which protects the people who are working in this sector without wanting to promote it, but you just you protect the people
many people
inside.
See that regulating is promoting.
We're not glamorizing sex work. Sex work is for some people who only pass 1, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months through sex work because they had no other choice in their lives for a certain moment. That can be a very traumatizing experience. And there are risks and there is violence. But at the same time, we must say that lots of the violence and lots of the risks are created by the absence of policy or by stigma. Stigma leads to violence.
And do you think that policy and laws can regulate also who holds this the power in that relationship, as you were talking in the beginning about consent, that the client should never play with consent and with limits? Do you think the law can also regulate who holds that power?
Well, if the person is doing a job which is protected, this person is doing a job which is recognized, this person will be able to go to the police and file a complaint against the client because her rights are guaranteed. So I think in the power balance, already the confirmation or already the recognition in Belgium that sex work is now legally recognized, and it opens the way to a legal framework for labor laws. Already this is a very empowering element for every sex worker that I know within their power balance with clients, because now the word is out, sex work is really legal. So why should I hesitate going to the police? Whilst before, we also know that there was no information given about sex work, because already giving information about sex work could be considered facilitating sex work, which was in the criminal code. Yeah. So we as an organization, we didn't risk giving too much information, for instance, but the fact that now we can give out information as we wish informs people on their rights, and already knowing your rights, well, that is also like the way that you can enforce your rights.
Mm-hmm. Can you walk us through what was like Belgium's law on sex work and penal code before the March 18th?
So basically, we're talking about two different sets of people who work in two different ways. So you have independent workers, so the ones who have their own little business. You could have your own business as a sex worker. I mean, not a business in which you employ other people, but you could be a sex worker working independently. This was already possible in Belgium, but the law criminalized every third party. That means, like, if you're a banker, if you're an accountant, if you're in insurances, if you are
an organization providing for information.
No, not
You risked it.
well. Not.
Okay.
I mean, we're somewhere in between.
Okay.
But anyway, if you are any person who is there to offer services to an independent sex worker, that independent sex worker needs to carry out her activity, you are a pimp, and you are criminalized. Was it really used by the Belgian judicial system to go after people? Sometimes, rarely, but it was possible. Which led to a situation where, for instance, even like renting out property to a sex worker was criminalized. You could be prosecuted for that, which means that, well, you're putting yourself into a certain risk renting out to a sex worker, so why don't you just ask 5 times the normal price? Because you are running the risk. So this is something we still see. At the same time, banks would just like, from the moment they knew that the business account was a business account for an independent sex worker, they would just like stop the account, and the person would not have a bank account anymore. This is something we often saw. Banks also refuse to give accounts to sex workers, and they always gave the reason that they couldn't because then they would be criminalized. Well, they can't anymore. They will have to. At the same time, we have people working as employees in sex businesses, so what we would call the brothels. Well, those people are working with a contract. But working under a contract as a sex worker was impossible because everybody who organized sex work of other people was also considered automatically a pimp, regardless of the fact whether or not you respected the rights of the sex workers working in your business. So even if you were, for instance, a sex worker who was working in a brothel, the manager says like, "Okay, I'm done. I'm just gonna sell this place to somebody else. I'm looking for somebody else to take over." Well, I mean, of course, there are sex workers who have been working there maybe 5 or 10 years who say like, "Okay, I will do it," and I mean, these sex workers, well, in my opinion, those are the best people to know how you should treat the people working for you, your personnel.
Mm-hmm. And be the employers or the boss.
Yeah, exactly. So, but even these people were considered pimps. At the same time, the real mafia guys who are completely exploiting their sex workers were in the same way seen as pimps. So every responsible manager passes as a pimp, and every mafia guy could pass as a responsible owner or employer.
Yeah.
So actually, it was very hard for instance, the police or for prosecutors to decide which situation was a problematic situation and which situation was an acceptable situation, because there were no rules. Because as a state, you can't impose rules on a sector that is not allowed to exist.
You called it a twilight zone.
Yeah, the gray zone mostly we say. The gray paste, the gray pasta, the gray. Yeah.
Because Belgium has red light districts, often with window shows as nearby. You could rent out a place, advertise your sexual services online, for instance.
You could, but you weren't supposed to. This was the policy of tolerance.
Yeah.
Because if you would follow the letter of the law, then all these things would disappear. Mm-hmm. But where would they disappear to? They would just go under the radar. So the policy was more like, okay, this is our law, which actually criminalizes every third party, but let's like tolerate some things because at least we have some visibility, so we have some access to those zones or to those worlds where people run a lot of risk. But at the same time, if you are outlawing a whole sector and at the same time you tolerate it and you're holding the means to go after whomever for whatever reason because you can, well, it just creates a lot of confusion, it creates a lot of chaos, and it actually creates a lot of, a lot of people didn't know their rights and actually they didn't have any.
Mm-hmm. On March 18th, the federal parliament in Belgium approved a draft law to tackle Article 380 of the the country's penal code, and change the sexual crime law. This bill, led by the Minister of Justice, decriminalized third parties, as you said, and it was voted for by 70 members of parliament, 42 abstained and 4 voted against. This law is not yet into force, right? Because they are...
No, it starts on the 1st of June, so in 10 days.
Yeah.
12 days, yeah.
What changes most with this approval?
Well, for now, so actually it's like a decriminalization step by step. So the first step is that every third party of independent sex workers from 1st of June on, they will be decriminalized. So independent sex workers will have the same rights as any other independent in the country. Then now we are, as the law stipulates that the organization of sex work of others is still being regarded as pimping, except for the cases that the law allows for, we're working on that law. And this law is the legal framework for labor conditions. So if you actually employ people within this legal framework, then you will not be prosecutable. If you don't, you will be prosecutable not only for pimping, but also for human trafficking.
Mm-hmm. But what's the distinction you're making between those two jobs that before were pimping and now you're trying to set a difference?
Yeah, we're making it crystal clear what is an acceptable situation and what isn't. And that's... Well, now we're actually working on the list of elements that have to be respected by employers, and this is a list of elements. So this is a labor law as exists for any other sector in our country. And if in any other sector in our country this code is not respected, you are prosecutable for human trafficking because that's exploitation. And that's the same thing which is going to happen with sex work right now.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that sex workers will have unemployment benefits, maternity and sick leaves? Mm-hmm. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
And
yes.
Yeah. And June, or are you still working on that?
We are working on that. There was also a very important other law which was passed in Belgium. So normally, when you're working as a sex worker, you can't have a contract which says you're a sex worker. So lots of people were employed under other contracts, like bar personnel or masseuses. Well, if these people would have any of their labor rights not respected by their employers, and they would go to court, they would always lose the trial because any contract which is contrary to public morals is considered to never have existed. And so the lawyer of the employer would always put this argument forward, and then the judge didn't have any other choice but to agree and follow. And then the person, the sex worker who was working under contract of a masseuse, she would lose all her social rights. So her unemployment benefits that were accumulated, her pension, all those things would just disappear. This is not possible anymore. So an employer cannot use this element against the sex worker.
Yeah, even consider the contract void, or
yeah, exactly, that's it. Yeah. So this is impossible in sex work, it already was impossible to, for instance, gambling is also contrary to public morals. So every person working for a casino who would have a conflict with his employer, like the employer could say okay, but this contract is void because it's actually gambling. So no, I mean, we have the same thing for sex workers right now. That's a good thing.
Because that law came from, it was dating from the 19th century, I read. The law that says that crimes against the order of fairness and public morals, and now sex work is considered, sex offenders are considered offenses against people, just like normal and any other crime. But how, in what means was that a problem? The declaring a contract void or null? It was common.
It happened. I wouldn't say it's common, but in any case, it did happen. Yes. I know a few cases. I haven't counted, but it was possible to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, even if there is a possibility, people will not go and file a complaint against their employer if the employer is not respecting their minimal conditions.
Yeah, because that could happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Minister of Justice said that the new law will ensure that sex workers are no longer stigmatized, exploited, and made dependent on others. And Belgium is the first country in Europe to decriminalize sex work, he said. Is this the full decriminalization of sex work that you expected? These the things you will be working through the year to complete. Is this the vision that you had when the union was created, when you were working on it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. Yeah. This was. So our first goal as a union is destigmatization. Our second is decriminalization. If you read the law really well, you see that sex work is going to be treated legally as any other profession, and this is the core of decriminalization. Of course, when it comes to destigmatization, we still have a lot of work to do, and I think. I mean, we've been very, very present in the media the last years, and this has really helped a lot. There's a lot of attention given to us by journalists, but also by people making human interest programs. There's been lots of programs on the television, which really give very which give the chance to sex workers to talk about their own lives and about their own difficulties, which are mostly much more mundane than people think. And so we are advancing at a very rapid speed when it comes to destigmatization, and the decriminalization also plays an element there, because the destigmatization, well, if you keep on criminalizing, that means like. By default, you will think, well, because the law says so, that every sex worker is by default linked to a criminal network. That is stigmatizing, because in most cases it is not correct. And this is also where my how should I put it? Where I have great difficulty with the discourse of abolitionist feminist organizations who want to outlaw sex work and who say that every sex worker is actually a victim, and that every sex worker who is fighting for her rights has false consciousness and cannot talk for herself. I mean, this is highly, highly stigmatizing. The discourse of abolitionist feminists is not only extremely victimizing, it is taking away the right to speak for sex workers. There was a third thing which was very important, and I just forgot it.
Considering the workers like a minor who cannot decide for themselves.
Yeah, of course. It considers them to be like not able. Yeah, this is a thing. I mean, it's patronizing. It's patronizing. So the thing is, like, you have a group of feminists who, after like making huge leaps forward when it comes to the rights of women, is now saying to other women what they can and cannot do with their bodies, which for me is the essence of patriarchy. At the same time, because and now like neo-abolitionism is there, and you have the state of Sweden like promoting it all over the world, and basically they're saying like, okay, I mean, the problem is the client. Like right now, I think in a week or so, in Sweden is going to vote to increase the punishment for clients of sex workers to 1 year imprisonment, except of course if they agree to follow a course to learn to respect women.
Mm-hmm. Because they understand that client perpetrates
the rape, let's say.
Rape culture.
I mean, which is interesting, because in Sweden, like if you look at it like really sharply legally, the client is not committing a crime against the sex worker, but a crime against the state. That's an interesting element. I mean, I'm going to say more about this, but you can delve into that. I mean, yeah. In any way, so the Swedish model, which has been adopted in Israel recently, but like in 2016 in France, it actually says that, okay, you have to go, if you want to make sex work disappear, well, first go after the clients, because if you take away demand, then there will be no more offer, which means that, okay, you are a single mother of 3 children. It looks to you that the best option you have in life to survive and feed your children is to do sex work. Okay, there's risks coming with sex work, but let's say like you're still doing okay. Then the client gets criminalized. What happens is that, okay, you're going to earn much less. Second, the clients who do not want to get into any close contact with the law, they will stay away. High-risk people will still be there and will still try to find you. They are putting themselves at risk again. So they are going to demand things from you that maybe you don't want to do. You don't have enough negotiating power and you don't have any rights anyway, because you're doing something which is illegal. I mean, you're part of an exchange which is illegal, so you're not going to go to the police. In any case, if you want help from social organizations in Sweden, for instance, you have to promise that you're going to stop doing sex work. In any case, a group of feminists is proposing all around the world, and they're very powerful, especially on a European level, and they're proposing to take away demand, of which they already should know, because this has been documented for 20 years now, that it increases violence on sex workers. So you have one part of feminists who are trying to put a group of women who are mostly already vulnerable and impoverished through hell, in the hopes that then they will make up their minds and stop doing sex work. Well, it doesn't work, and it just increases suffering.
Do you think?
And I think that is like that is actually going against the basis not only of feminism but also of fundamental human rights.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, if you think that there can be a feminist approach to abolitionism.
Well, I mean, that's what created the change from the second wave feminism to the third wave feminism was that the feminists, they divided in 2 schools. You have the abolitionists and you have the sex positives. So of course there is a feminist approach to sex work in which you see it as well. I mean, sex positivism entails much more than only sex work, but sex work is holds a central place in sex positivism. In the way that you see sex as something that is not holy, that can have many different forms of expression, and that sex work can also be an empowering thing. Mm-hmm. The only thing we should not do is try to keep it within that cage of this idealized situation of the I don't know, the fairy tale vision of love and sexuality, where you're equal partners and you love each other. I mean, I don't know if the Swedish people are very much promoting monogamy. I don't know that. But in any case, they see sex as something else. And this is also very, I mean, you also see that historically, sex has been approached in Sweden mostly through the lens of danger and disease.
And do you think it also always relates with morale? The abolitionist arguments, they always lay with morale? Well,
the moral argument was the one that was used in the 80s. But then they saw okay, I mean, it doesn't seem to work, so let's switch the discourse to human trafficking.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that beneath all that, there's still this moral consideration about women who do sex work or sex workers in general?
I have no doubt about it. Yes.
I wanted to go back to the way you see pimping and you're thinking about it, because I think it can be important to think about models in other countries. So pimping will remain criminalized.
And happily so.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if a pimp is always an exploiter in your vision.
Yes, without any question, yes.
Can you explain why?
Okay, but I mean, pimp is of course like it's a term which is used a lot by popular media. It's the
I went
guy
looking for another term, but I didn't think another one in
it's
English.
the guy standing at the corner of the street, and sometimes we have them here as well. I mean, pimps do exist, of course, but I mean, you shouldn't stereotype it too much. Like the cliche does exist, but there's many different forms of pimping. A pimp is somebody who is who's organizing this. I mean, I'm just going to use the new Belgian law. It is something who is organizing the prostitution of another person while not respecting the integrity, physical integrity, psychological and sexual integrity of that other person. That's my definition of pimping.
But isn't capitalist society based upon work exploitation always, and exploitation man by man?
Well, that's why you have labor laws to protect us from too much exploitation. I mean, it depends on which sector you're in and which place you hold in society. I don't think that the director of let's say Engie in like the energy company in France thinks the same way about this. I mean, he's also an employee of his board, but it depends. Not always. In some cases, yes. And I think that's where the importance of unions comes in. I mean, we are a union. So we are actually fighting for labor protection against exploitation, like any other job. Of course, you have exploitation. I mean, most of our clothes are made by exploited workers in countries where you don't have unions.
Or sex laws, or labor laws.
Or labor laws, yeah. So that's my answer against that. The barrier we have against exploitation is labor protection.
Are there in Belgium horizontal sex workers cooperatives, or do you imagine that can be an answer also for this model of work? So
a cooperative in which every person working for the brothel would also be an owner of the brothel, I think that is the ideal way. I think that's the way forward. For sure.
So you think that the decriminalization makes exit prostitution easier? Or
well, that depends on how much is invested in programs to help people reorient themselves in a professional way, because we know that lots of people in sex work, let's say, not prostitution, in sex work, many people in sex work are people who have tried everything else, and it didn't work. Some people, we also know of people who I mean, okay, we already have those things here. I mean, if somebody says I want to quit prostitution, well, we all work together with other associations to find this person a job as soon as possible, because we don't want anyone to stay in prostitution if they don't want to, of course. But then again, we also know cases of people who didn't have any kind of diplomas, for instance, who are relegated to jobs in which they earn not enough to survive on, as a cleaning lady, for instance. And after 3 months, 4 months, they say, fuck it, I'm going to go back to prostitution. So there is an economic reality there as well. And for people who aren't scholarized enough, well, there's not a lot of options to earn enough money to have a life. That's also a problem.
Yeah, many people would go there for consent. But as you explained, it would be in any other job, cleaning or doing it at a call center.
It's true, but I mean, at the same time, we know there's a link between poverty and sex work, but I don't think you have to go after the effects and not after the cause. Go after the cause. Of course, there's going to be less people doing sex work. Let's say we solve the poverty problem and nobody is poor anymore. Then some people would argue, well, we will not have sex workers anymore. I think they're wrong. There will still be people who want to do this profession, for sure. Much less, of course. Much less.
the Justice Minister said that once the bill is enacted, sex workers will be able to do their job with equal rights. The pandemic showed us they did not enjoy sufficient protection. Do you think that Belgium would be on this path right now if it weren't for the pandemic?
No, not at all, no. It's because of the fact that, we have very, very strong labor laws in Belgium. That's because of the amazing work of our unions decades ago. It's very complicated, but it gives you a lot of rights. So people are very used to, one, this high labor protection, two, this very high standard of living we have in Belgium. And all of a sudden, every sector had to close. I mean, not every sector, of course, but most sectors had to close. And the only sector which had to close, but where the people did not automatically have the right to any compensations from the government, were the sex workers, because their sector actually does not exist. So a legal contract would also be impossible. So how could you be compensated for let's say a fake profession? Mm-hmm. I mean, the reality is much more complex than this, but this is just schematically what happened. And we started. Well, I think it first started because lots of journalists, they even from serious magazines are like, ha, these sex workers, let's make something spicy. I mean, let's look at Corona through the lens of sex work. And then they would make and then it was only already 1 week after the first lockdown is sex workers, they're experiencing golden times. And we're a union, I mean, we're in contact with hundreds of people, and everybody's everybody's at home, everybody's afraid of the virus. But then maybe this journalist just found a few people who were still working and who said everybody's coming to me. Well, if the rest of the sector stops, probably everybody's coming to you. So we reacted really, really heavily to this. I mean, lots of the sex workers were at home. They read all the newspapers. From the moment there was something that they didn't like, they really wanted to react strongly. And we did that. We also reacted. And by reacting like that, I mean, I don't know, every week a journal or a magazine would make one story about sex work during Corona. And we had so much attention that after 2 months, the prime minister of the Flemish regional government was in the TV studios of the channel VTM, and without preparation probably, the news anchor asked him, "But sir, have you thought about the sex workers?" And then the prime minister was like, well, yes, of course. I mean, we are working on solutions, and those people, they also have their societal function, and we also gave them that societal function. So why would we not help them right now? And then we had the virologist getting in touch with us, to start thinking about protocols of safe Corona sex and how you do that. And I mean, also, there's lots of people here in this area in Brussels who are very precarious and who are working, I don't know under which kind of contract. In any case, there's lots of people in the country who did not have any way to feed themselves or feed their children. So we did food distributions from a brothel of one of our members. And so this was also in the news. I mean, we didn't allow any journalists to film the big line of people working, waiting to get their food distributions. But we had many camera teams coming over to film how we were preparing for the food distributions. But these are scenes from the Great Depression. And you have a state which has such a high standard of living, wealthy nation, in which these kinds of situations are possible. I think this really stirred the public and also politics. And that's how the opening was made, to start negotiating about a way to prevent this from ever happening in the future again.
Mm-hmm. And when you're campaigning and lobbying to exit this legal limbo, have you received support from other unions of workers?
Well, we have entered into some talks with unions, but I think more on a technical level. I think we I owe a lot of gratitude to the three nationally recognized centers of aid to victims of human trafficking who joined our battle. Also to all the socio-medical organizations for sex workers, but then also for the Human Rights League on both sides of the language border. There's the Knowledge Center for Sexual Health that also joined our strife. There's lots of other organizations which maybe were not automatically linked to sex work itself, but who supported us a lot, yeah.
And do you think this law and the changes you're making can protect all sex workers? My question is, even in cities as Liège, which for the past year have been imposing local restrictions on sex work, or other cities that are doing that locally? Do you think there can be a law that abarks and protects all sex workers?
That remains to be seen. Every mayor in our country is allowed to impose rules if it is in the interest of public order. And so, if he cannot prove it is in the interest of public order, the rule has to be lifted. This is how we managed to lift rules which were repressive towards sex workers in the past. I don't know in which way local rules which contradict the federal framework of decriminalization will be dealt with in the future. What I do know is that at least now we have a federal framework, and that wasn't the case in the past. But as this, there are many other questions which remain to be answered.
And do you think that this battle, this fight, is going to be more in the courts from now on?
I think the biggest thing on our plate right now is to negotiate a labor deal, which is which just like the decriminalization, as we saw in the campaign for decriminalization, politicians listened to sex workers. We hope that this will also be the case during the negotiations about the labor deal, which have started already. But there's lots of work when it comes to that. And if you're talking about will this be decided like the contradictions between the federal law and the local law imposed by the mayors, well, we have seen in the last 10 years here in Brussels 4 such cases in which the Constitutional Court had to intervene against mayors. It does cost a lot of energy and it does cost a lot of money. So it would be nice if a way could be thought of to prevent it instead of fighting it before the Constitutional Court.
Just 2 more questions.
Okay.
If the union states, I think in an interview, that this is a fight to spark society out of its notions of normality and heteronormality, patriarchy, and contemporary forms of slavery and colonization. I wanted to ask you, what's the role of churches and religious institutions in this conversation in Belgium?
Well, I would say none, except for the fact that the first person who proposed this decriminalization legislation was a member of the Christian Party. It's the former Minister of Justice. The first person who gave us a subsidy for our union to be able to exist was a Christian Minister of Public Health. The Christian Party is very much on our side, which is not the case in Holland, for instance. It's much harder there, but we are Catholics. I mean, I'm not a Catholic. I don't know anybody who is. No, I know some people who are Catholic still, but in any case, I think there's much more humanitarianism to Catholicism than to Protestant Orthodoxy. And I also know that one of the big factors which make it very difficult for sex workers in the Netherlands is the Christian Party over there. So I think like one advantage we have in Belgium, like if you look at it, like we were the second country in the world to allow abortion, second country in the world to allow gay marriage, second country in the world to allow euthanasia. The church and the Christian Party still have some difficulty with euthanasia. That's true. But with sex work, it doesn't seem to be the case. If we look at other countries who are abolitionists, we see that Sweden, that the Protestant Church is very present. You look at France, the Catholic Church is also very present. So it doesn't really have to do a lot about. It doesn't have so much to do with Catholicism, I think. But in Belgium, I think Belgium is like. I think Belgium. I think one of the things which is also interesting, if you look at the history of the Christian party in our country, its founder was a priest who fought for labor rights for the textile laborers in the city of Aalst, for instance. So this labor strife, it was always linked to Christianity. So that gives like a different vision than like imposing the rules that are coming from beyond.
Mm-hmm. And in Mechelen, there's a cathedral that has a LGBTQ flag
of
on
course,
top.
this is quite normal. This is
coming from Portugal.
Yeah,
Not quite sure. Your union motto, I wanted to finish talking about prejudice and stigma. Now you can try to fight it. And just one thing, that the union motto is nothing about us without us. But I wanted to ask you a more personal question. But you are not a sex worker. Do you think that's a contradiction?
Well, I have more characteristics of privilege than only that. I'm also a man. The danger that I run by talking to you or being on television is very low compared to any of my colleagues who are women, because the stigma is very high on women. It's not on men. We know from the people who have outed in the past that their lives have become hell because of stigma and because of people prosecuting them for whatever they could because they were sex workers anyway. So if a group of engaged citizens comes together and they form an organization and they hire someone to do the work, I think that's quite empowering. So maybe we could see it that way.
Yeah. And do you think that now with these changes, coming out as a sex worker would be more safe, but also less stigmatized and something that people can do freely?
Well, this thing that was this decriminalization bill that was passed on the 18th of 17th, 18th. It was at 1:30 in the morning. It has released a lot of like amazing energy in our community, and it has a ripple effect. Our gatherings, which are open to any sex work, the people coming here has so much increased. They know about decriminalization, and because they know about decriminalization, that has taken away one barrier for them to come to us already. That is only one thing I see with my own eyes. I don't know about the other effects. But the thing is also that the way we talk about sex work, we are not saying that it cannot be problematic, because in many cases it is problematic. But we're at the same time saying that you can also be proud of yourself for doing this. And this is a message which has come across really easily right now after the passing of this bill to sex workers. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hear.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Esta entrevista foi preparada por mim, Margarida David Cardoso. A edição de áudio é do Bernardo Afonso. Fazem ainda parte da equipa Fumaça Danilo Tomás, Fred Rocha, Joana Batista, Luís Marquês, Maria Almeida, Nunes Viegas, Pedro Miguel Santos e Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro. A música é dos Lotus Fever. Podes ouvir mais episódios em fumaca.pt, no YouTube, Spotify ou na tua aplicação de podcasts. Se queres ajudar a fazer com que o Fumaça seja financiado por quem nos ouve, vê e lê, considera contribuir em fumaca.pt/contribuir. Até já!